From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Okay, here's the problem. Quiet part out loud. I feel like everybody knows this. The problem is that the people and the organizations with the most power here, the relatively small group of entities that are capable of addressing this problem in a meaningful way, are also the ones making the most money off the system as it is. And to be crystal clear transparent, we're not talking about people who are working on oil rigs. And we're not talking about people working in a plastic bag factory or people making plastic cutlery for takeout and picnics. We're talking about the people in the institutions that own those oil rigs, the people in the institutions that own those factories. They spent a great amount of time and money first accurately predicting this problem. They knew about it, and then they spent some time covering it up or trying to spin it to their advantage. In corporate parlance, the phrase is getting in front of it. That's what they tried to do. They tried to get in front of it. And there's a playbook for these situations. It is common across industries, and it is so simple, and it is so effective. It's just switching out that revenue stream. Like R.J. Reynolds. We did recently I think it was Strange News segment. We talked about how it was R.J. Reynolds, right, who said they supported the UK ban on tobacco?
Right. And there was even talk of one of the big tobacco manufacturers limiting their production of combustible cigarettes. And they wouldn't have done that on day one. Heavens, we've discovered that cigarettes are bad for the health of our citizenry. Shut it down, boys. No, they bided their time and downplayed it until they had a viable alternative that they could also make shit tons of money on, a.k.a. vaping.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. We need to hit that point again. They only did this once they knew they could generate income some other way.
And they did it with a disposable plastic thing that I'm holding in my hand right now that gets used by millions of people probably. I don't know the exact numbers of people who use these kinds of disposable vaping things, like myself. Part of the problem here. But this is...
We're all part of the problem, man.
Well, but I'm just saying this particular thing, this one, the Juul one, all the others, it's becoming a massive plastics problem.
Yeah, yeah. And this strategy, this kind of transference of income strategy, plays out across multiple industries. It's applied to the world of plastics as well. Mark our words. As soon as a one-to-one inexpensive alternative to plastic is found, it will probably become proprietary, and whomever is lucky enough to own the rights to that material will immediately press their advantage. They will end up, in pursuit of profits, maybe swinging the needle to make the world a better place. And it's like desperation makes strange bedfellows, man. Imagine being one of those environmentalists who is like, shit, now I have to go to a rally for Dow Chemical.
Yeah, that's the thing, though, because they'll masquerade it out as some, grandstanding, doing something about it, stance, which is utter horseshit, that we know how long they've known. They don't actually care. But then they'll, spend a bunch of time workshopping the language around their big pivot, and then they'll, trot it out there as some sort of benevolent act of good.
Yeah, and we're not saying, I don't think any of us are saying that the people working in these companies or even the people at the top are necessarily evil individuals. And I think some of these efforts are in good faith, Matt, in the research earlier, you had pointed out Coca-Cola had a plan to recycle an aluminum can for every can they created by 2030. And that seems like a good faith effort, but make no mistake, there is not a for-profit company in the world that would do something like this if it meant it would damage their profits. You know what I mean? There is always a calculation at play.
Yeah, I think the Coke thing was something like by 2025 they would recycle everything, but then by 2030 they would create all of their products with recycled plastic, which is like, yay, that's a great idea.
Sure. And like, didn't
luck.
Lego say they were going to pivot away from using plastic bags in their packaging? Obviously not, away from using plastic in their Legos. And then McDonald's, I think, is going to start using cardboard as their toys, make them little puzzles or assemblable, doodads rather than plastic, because that's a big drain as well. And again, I'm not saying these efforts I think are cool, and obviously there's some goodwill behind them, and PR is obviously positive. I'm sure someone in the company does care and thinks it's a good idea, big picture. But I'm just a little jaded. I tend to think these are just kind of like marketing stunts rather than them actually giving a shit.
Yeah, unfortunately, they're doing what they were designed to do, the same way that fish swim. That's why a company or a for-profit corporation exists. But here's the other thing: if you were to go into the back room of some of these executive offices, and you were to say, "Hey, just between us, what do you think the chances of getting off plastic are really?" What you would find is that, yeah, because not all plastics are created equally, there are viable alternatives for some, but until that economy of scale kicks in, the price is going to be a big problem for these companies. So the secret is, the best way to solve this dilemma, the Holy Grail, if there were a Holy Grail for this quest, is not to find an alternative for these various kinds of plastic in their end state, but rather to find an alternative to the oil used to create them in the first place. That's the spice in this Dune universe. And who knows what it is? Knowing the hubris of humanity as we do, how messed up would it be if it was water? And they're like, okay, we figured out somehow, there's some sci-fi chemical shenanigans. We figured out a way to make basically anything that you can make with plastic from water. It has to be fresh water. So people might be thirsty. They would 100% do it, though. That's how messed up is that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
They would. No, it's okay. Yeah. It's what would likely happen. Some thoughts, but I'm going to save them. Sorry, let's keep going.
Well, okay, so how important is this? Having control over this, whatever this thing, this Holy Grail would be the equivalent of becoming the first country or company to wield nuclear power. And yeah, that might sound a little like hyperbolic, right? But without being alarmist, that is the level of impact we're talking about. And when this thing is discovered, and whatever these things are, the world will again be irrevocably changed. If, that is, the technology goes public and isn't purposely suppressed. Shout out to the National Invention Secrecy Act. Check that one out if you want to be a lot of not fun at parties. That's the reality here. While this bickering, this research continues to play out, the clock is ticking. And if you look past the noise, the theater of domestic politics, those glossy PR presentations and PSAs, the facts are undeniable. If these power systems are not dismantled, if these conspiracies are not busted, then there's a strong possibility that we won't be talking about a world without plastic for long. We'll be talking instead about a world without humans. I don't want to sound preachy, but that's where we are at. These companies will have to be incentivized by profit, or their hands forced by undeniable disaster that affects the wealthy as much as it affects the poor. And I just don't. I don't know where it would. I don't know where it would go. It's quite a pickle.
Yeah, I don't know where to go either. It feels like to me, and I am not somebody who knows anything about any of this and can't recommend any of these things, but if you had to increase the price of products overall because of the phasing out of plastics, the only way to really solve that thing without the version you're talking about, Ben, where some other alternative that is like at that same price point, would be to raise all ships by somehow instituting universal income in some way for every person on the planet to make sure they can afford the absolute necessities. And even then, I mean, there are ways to go about that, but they're not very fun for everyone.
Yeah.
And the people who, they're not fun for the people who would have the sufficient power to fight back against it. So it really does feel like we're in that dire of a situation at this point.
Well, there is another possibility, right? While plastics are still around, Elon Musk just came out and suggested to folks who want to go to Mars but can't afford the projected $500K to $1 million price tag for the trip. He said, well, you could just fly to Mars and maybe work it off once you get there. You go to join a company town in Mars as an indentured servant.
Yeah.
More things change, man.
You'll only owe as much as, you know, an above average person makes in their lifetime. It's fine.
That's fine. Right. This is so will the world be without plastics? Probably not. And a lot, and we pointed this out. I'm really glad we pointed this out on our last episode. A ton of time went into trying to convince individual consumers that they were the problem. And we're part of a problem, but the majority of that waste is not necessarily coming from you. It's like blaming the person who just has a job on an oil rig. You know what I mean? That person is not big oil. They're just doing a job. And so there was one statement we could end on here that comes from Roland Geyer, a professor at the Britton School of Environmental Science and Management at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He's pretty bleak, guys, just to let you know before we hit it. He says, you can't just leave this up to households. They have no chance. Plastic producers should share a significant part of the responsibility. At this point, I don't see that happening without policy intervention. So the politicians have to get involved. The corporations have to say yes. If every person you know did their level best to separate plastic from their lives, is a serious question about how much of a difference it would actually make. It's not saying you shouldn't do it. It's just saying that's not going to stop the current operation we're in.
Well, yeah, if companies are still producing small disposable plastic things that just sit on shelves at stores, they're going to be thrown away at some point. And the only good thing is that if consumers aren't buying those things and they sit on the shelf for long enough, the whatever store that is won't order more, which means there won't be a demand from the company to buy more. So that is a route. I mean, it's not the most viable one necessarily, but it is a route. If you stop the demand, then hopefully they'll stop the supply.